So I first started my channel last year, and at the beginning of the year I had every intention to do regular wrap-ups and I just didn't end up doing them. So what I wanted to do instead is to start going through the books that I read so far this year and just talk about all of them briefly. I'm going to break this year into 4 quarters. I'm going to start with Q1, which will be the books that I read in January, February, and March. So just gonna open this up on Goodreads. So the first book I read this year was Animal Farm. I will just say starting off your year or month with a novella is a really nice treat. I do it all the time. It's just a way to get through a book very quickly, feel accomplished, and it doesn't really take up a lot of time. So I read Animal Farm over a weekend at the beginning of January, and I really enjoyed it. George Orwell's writing is very short, very to the point, also very dry. I read this book originally back in high school, and I can see why it's a book that high school students can read. A little bit more violence than I remembered there being, but overall I would say it is fairly appropriate, at least for high school students. But obviously there's layers and complexities to the novel because it follows these animals on a farm, but the actual novel is based off of what happened with the Russian Revolution and Lenin and Stalin. So I really enjoyed it. I liked how it takes somewhat of a complicated concept of the Russian Revolution and puts it into a story that's very easy for the average person to understand. So I would say I really started this year with a bang by starting with Animal Farm. And I would also say that I like that more than 1984, which is also by George Orwell. The next novel I read was My Sister, the Serial Killer, and that is by Oyinkan Braithwaite. So this also was a very short book, which is part of the reason why I picked it. And it's written by a Nigerian author. I was looking for a book by a slightly more diverse author. I didn't really like this. It was okay, but didn't really have what I typically look for in a novel. I would say that there are some novels that are very plot heavy and plot driven and you're really following the story, whereas there are others that are a little bit less narrative focused and more meditative. I prefer the second category, whereas I would say this falls in the first category. It was interesting to see this idea of a serial killer being dealt with in Nigeria, where you obviously have things like corruption and bribery. So, you know, looking at something like a police investigation. That doesn't quite happen in the same way that it would happen with serial killer novels based in countries like America. So that aspect of it was interesting. I did somewhat enjoy learning more about the characters, but just wasn't really for me overall. The next novel I read was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. So this novel follows these 2 friends who are really into video games. You meet them as kids and it follows them as they're a little bit older and gives you an interesting look into video games and the video game industry as a whole. I would say I actually quite enjoyed both of the 2 main characters in this novel. Different than the characters that you usually see, have different viewpoints, different ways of looking at the world than characters I typically come across in contemporary novels, so I did like that element of it. I have a fairly detailed book review on this book that I will include in the description box if you're interested in checking that out. But overall, I liked it. I didn't love it, but I thought it was okay. The next book I read was A Passage North, and that is by Anuk Arudpragasam. I am obsessed with this novel. I absolutely love it. The novel follows this man who's living in Sri Lanka just after the Civil War, and he goes on a journey to northern Sri Lanka. There's not much that happens in this novel, like not much at all, so if you are coming to it based on the story, thinking you're going to learn lots about the war, that's not really what this book is about. It's more so very meditative. The author takes these concepts and spends pages and pages just exploring them. So things such as time, aging, loss, love. I found it really interesting, very beautiful, very enchanting writing, and really enjoyed the novel as a whole, but I think it has very mixed reviews. From what I can see, people either really like it or really dislike it. I loved it. Definitely one of my favorite novels I've read so far this year, and I plan to read the other book by Anuk Arudpragasam called The Story of a Brief Marriage. I really want to read that. I'm going to read that soon actually. So the last novel I read in January was Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. I have so many thoughts about this novel. I eventually will make a review just on this book. There's just so much to talk about in this novel. So this novel follows multiple characters, all living in Russia for the most part. And what I really love about this novel is you see all of the different ways people view love. Some people see it as more of a transaction, some people see it as more of a tradition, some people see it as, you know, a duty to God. So you see all of these different ways in which people view love, and it then explains why they have difficulties in their marriages, because they're coming into their relationships with different expectations about what love promises, what marriage is supposed to bring. I just find it a really beautiful novel. I'm currently working through War and Peace by Tolstoy, and I would say right now I definitely prefer Anna Karenina. There's more going on to the story. It's a little bit easier to follow in my view. It's not quite as tedious as War and Peace is. And Zevin is probably my favorite character that I've read so far this year. Very intense young man. I just love men who go into love and relationships with this intensity and just wear their heart on their sleeves and are just willing to put themselves out there so much. And I just love seeing characters like that. He also just seems very passionate about life in general, looking at ways in which you can reform Russian society, education, that sort of thing. So I just find him so cute. I love Zevin. So then the next book I read was in February, and that was Pure Color by Sheila Heti. I still don't really know how I feel about this book, but I will say that I've not ever read anything like it. So I think based on that, I would say that overall I enjoyed it. I don't even know how to explain this novel. It's very experimental in nature, follows this character who is living in a time period that I guess in a sense is a little bit dystopian, but it's written in a very almost like magical tone to it. It feels like you're in another world, in another galaxy, in another dimension, in a good way, It feels very philosophical in nature. Yeah, it's a very interesting novel. I don't really have much more to say about it other than that. But if you're looking for something different, something a bit experimental in your fiction, I would definitely recommend Pure Color. The other fiction book I read in February was The Curious Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I did not like this book at all. I actually really disliked it. It's probably my least favorite book I've read so far this year. I was interested in exploring this concept of the duality of man and sort of understanding within one person's nature there can be both good and bad elements to them. And I know frequently people refer to that phrase of Jekyll and Hyde, referring to, you know, one person who has this like split nature and duality to them. But I just didn't enjoy the reading experience. I understand overall what the novel is trying to do, and I understand that reference, but I just didn't enjoy the reading experience at all. So I really would not recommend that. I think if you are looking into exploring that sort of concept of the duality of man, I think East of Eden tackles it much better. And I will talk about that in another one of these videos because I read that, I want to say in May of this year. The next novel I read was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. So after reading Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, I was really interested in exploring this concept of passion. Not wanting to spoil Anna Karenina, but I would say part of the moral of that story is about not following one's passions and how one's passions can actually mislead you and end up with you choosing the wrong person. So I was interested to see what other classical works of literature had to say about this idea of following one's passion when it comes to romantic relationships. And I had watched this movie, Sense and Sensibility, before, so I knew what the story was about, but I'd never read the book. And this is an interesting novel, or I found it interesting at least, following two sisters. And one sister has, you know, sense, very logical in her decisions when it comes to choosing a romantic partner, and doesn't get overwhelmed by her emotions. And the other sister is one who's very passionate, very interested in sort of being all consumed by love. And then it explores how both of them date and sort of find romantic partners. And it's a very interesting novel when it comes to this idea of using reason when it comes to picking one's romantic partner, because I just think that passion is not at all indicative of whether or not someone is going to be a good life partner to you, and how sometimes being overconsumed by passion doesn't allow you to focus enough on a person's character. I thought the ideas that it dealt with were really interesting, but I didn't necessarily love the reading experience. I thought there would be more quotes that really stood out to me, but not so much. I think more than anything, I enjoyed the overall themes and ideas of the novel. So I read that back in March, and then after that I read Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. And again, following that theme of following one's passions and romantic relationships, I would say Madame Bovary is an extreme example of the downsides of what happens in following one's passions. This is a woman who's married and has a series of affairs with other men because she's heavily influenced by the romantic literature that she read as a kid. And in her marriage, she doesn't feel this sort of passionate feeling she expects to have from a lover, and so because of that chooses to have affairs and take on lovers who she feels that passion with. Definitely looks at the downsides of that and how that can result in a life that is not fulfilling, because at the end of the day, what does that passion actually mean when it comes to the idea of like having a family, raising children, stuff like that. I would say out of the books that I read on that topic, this was probably the one I liked the least. Felt a little bit too on the nose, a bit too in your face about the downsides of passion. I like a little bit more nuance. I don't want it to be so like cut and dry. Anyway, I don't want to spoil the novel, but yeah, I didn't like this novel that much, but I understood what Flaubert was trying to do. I also read Romeo and Juliet during that time period because I also wanted to explore that within Shakespeare. So I didn't like this as much as I thought I would. I will say I've noticed with Shakespeare, I like his histories the most. I would say I like his histories, and then I actually like his comedies, and then I would say tragedies at the end. His tragedies are just a little bit too over the top for me and for my liking. So I didn't really like this. I thought I was going to find some really beautiful quotes in Romeo and Juliet, and surprisingly I didn't. There were a few at the beginning, but nothing groundbreaking. Sorry, Shakespeare. But I need to remember that just because I didn't really like this one doesn't mean I shouldn't read Shakespeare anymore. I probably just should pick up one of his histories next. Okay, and then after that I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this was a reread for me. I read it before a few years ago. I was just looking for a novel that explored someone who didn't follow the sort of typical pathway when it comes to, you know, getting married, having kids, finding a job and being successful, and just chose to sort of chart her own path. So this novel follows this woman who works at a convenience store, and it's very short and really just follows her life and her existence, her friendships, her job, and how she feels very fulfilled and very happy with the life path that she's chosen. Very cute book. Not my favorite and a little bit strange. I will say that. It was a little bit weird, but I liked that. Sometimes you like sort of strange and weird characters and quirky characters, I would say. So yeah, I thought this novel was okay. It was different. And so the last novel I'm going to talk about is This Is How You Lose Her by Junot Diaz. This also was a reread for me. I was at a period in my life where there was someone I'd been seeing and I wasn't sure if I should give him another chance. And when I think about men who make lots of mistakes when it comes to relationships, this is the novel I always think of. So I wanted to read it to see if maybe I wasn't being empathetic enough, or whether there are just instances where men just make very poor decisions and, you know, that's on them and there's nothing that you can really do. Like, that's just who they are as a person. Anyway, so I reread this, and I will say I felt no empathy or sympathy towards his main character. I feel like he just caused so many unnecessary issues in his life and didn't really seem to be interested in working on improving himself at all. Just really didn't take accountability for his actions at all. This is not my favorite book, but if you are a man that makes loads of poor life decisions when it comes to romantic relationships, you might probably like this. Okay, so I'm now going to get into the nonfiction books that I read during Q1. The first one I read was A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. This is an essay collection by this author who is Indigenous Also interesting because she lived in both America and Canada, so she can reflect on that experience as an Indigenous or First Nations person in both of those two countries. I also will say she is half. Her mother was white, and her mother suffered from mental health issues. So talking about her experience with her mother and her mental health issues, talking about being part Indigenous, talking about not really feeling like she belonged anywhere, talking about the poverty that she experienced in her life. I really enjoyed this essay collection because it weaved in Elliott's personal stories along with Indigenous history. So something I would really recommend. There was one chapter in particular that talked about trauma, which I found very eye-opening. And she compared the experience of Indigenous people to some Ukrainian people, and talking about the fact that that legacy of oppression can then result in trauma that's seen by things like addiction within those communities. So very interesting book. I definitely will reread it and probably make a video just on it because I found it very great and a very accessible read if you are interested in learning more about Indigenous issues and just don't really know where to start. I would say this is a really great book for a beginner. After that, I read The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays by Albert Camus. I have a reading vlog where I talk about reading this, so I'll include that in the description box. I did not like this at all. So far, I've read 3 works by Camus. I've read The Stranger, I've read this, and I've read The Fall. And I would say The Fall is the only one that I've somewhat liked. I find The Myth of Sisyphus really interesting, this idea of someone being punished in the afterlife and their punishment is to push up this like boulder up a hill, and as soon as it gets to the top of the hill it falls back down again. And really Camus is saying like this is our life's existence, we're just like doing the same thing over and over again, and the meaninglessness of it all. I'm not fully sure what it is about existentialism I disagree with, but I know it's something. Then after that I read Quinton Tarantino, A Graphic Biography by Michel Bouton. When I got this, I actually thought it was written by Quentin Tarantino, so I'm like, I don't think I would have read it. But I am trying to read more comics because I think they're really accessible books for people who are not really into reading. So if you are interested in Quentin Tarantino and his movies and want a sort of understanding of what made him choose some of the scripts he did or what it was like working with him in some of the movies, this is a great one to pick up. After that, I read All About Love by Bell Hooks. This might be my 4th time reading it. I've read it several times already. This time I listened to it as an audiobook. That's why I got it again, because now an audiobook is available. I really loved it as an audiobook. I think I will probably end up purchasing that so I can listen to it. I will probably relatively soon do a video just on All About Love because this book changed my life. But I do want to say, this book is not really just about romantic love. There are some chapters about that. But the chapters that really actually changed my life were the ones that look at like our values and greed and the ways in which, you know, capitalism is a system lacking love, right? Because it's all about material possession and accumulating for ourselves while not worried about other people. So this idea of like living with a love ethic in everything you do really came to me from reading this book, as well as this idea of having a community of friendships and what that looks like and how we need to be honest with our friends. Also this idea of loving ourselves and having healthy self-esteem in order to have healthy relationships with other people, and how part of that includes not gossiping, being honest with people, sharing our true feelings with them, rather than people pleasing so that others were sort of like you, but you're being disingenuous. Also this idea of not disassociating, so like being the same person no matter who you're around. That's definitely something that I struggled with, feeling the need to change who I am based on who I'm around, and how a lot of that comes from like an unhealthy level of self-esteem. And so working on loving yourself, you're then going to be able to love others. Anyway, really great book, really great book. I could talk about it for hours. After that I read The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I have been meaning to do a review on this, but I don't really know how I feel. Overall, I didn't really like it. I think it's good. Like, Aurelius has words of wisdom in there, but the format is very disorganized. And I understand it wasn't intended to be a book. It's sort of just like writings that he has on certain topics that were just like compiled together. I found because it didn't really have an organized structure, it was very difficult for me to keep paying attention. So I think it was good in theory, and there were some words in there that really stood out to me, but overall I would not recommend it as a work of philosophy to read. After that, I read Race Matters by Cornel West. I love this book. I love it. It's so good. There were certain chapters that really were eye-opening to me, and I would say a few that stood out to me were the chapter on Black and Jewish relationships, because West talks about the fact that during the civil rights movement, Jewish people were very heavily involved in the civil rights movement and helping overcome things like Jim Crow in the South, and how some Jewish people feel a bit betrayed by African Americans who do not support Israel. And Cornel West talks about the fact that to African Americans, the Palestinians are like them. They're the ones who are being oppressed, and Israel is like America, the colonizer, the colonized state, right? So he just talks about the conflict between those two, and it was a very interesting essay that I've not really seen anyone else talk about. I also really enjoyed his chapter about affirmative action. It's not exactly what the chapter is called, but it deals with affirmative action, and he makes really great arguments as to why affirmative action is really a good thing to have. That's something that I've been wanting to eventually maybe like make a video essay on, or just like explore deeper. So that chapter was a really great start. And I also liked his chapters talking about like the lack of leaders since, you know, the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., the lack of Black leadership in the Black community, and also about the rise of Black conservatism. So overall, a really great book. I think the thing I liked the most about it is Cornel West's writing style. I really struggled with a lot of nonfiction because I think it's just written in such a dull and dry way, but this book was written so well. It just like really packs a punch, and I was intellectually challenged every single sentence. After that, I read Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot by Mickey Kendall. I will say I actually did not like this book at all. I probably will be selling it because I own a copy. I didn't really gain a lot from it. I didn't learn much from the arguments that Kendall was making. I think now I'm looking for people who can identify issues and then help to come up with solutions. This felt more like critiquing loads of issues in our society and system without helping to come up with ways to move forward. So yeah, I actually really did not like that book, and I feel bad because I wanted to like it. Okay, sorry, run out of space. So the next book I read was Requiem for the American Dream by Chomsky, and I didn't mind this book, but it wasn't my favorite. Really just looking at the ways in which American society concentrates wealth and power in different ways. It wasn't bad, but I didn't love it. I actually don't have a lot to say about this one. I listened to the audiobook. I think I struggle with Chomsky a little bit. I think he has really great ideas, but I don't always find him the most engaging person to read. So yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about that one. Next, I read Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement. I actually didn't really like this very much. So the idea of this book was looking at comparisons between what's going on in Palestine and what happened in Ferguson. And the one chapter that looked at the military and the ways in which, you know, the military techniques being used in Palestine were also used during the protests in Ferguson, that was interesting. But overall, I didn't really like this. I didn't feel like I learned a lot about what was going on in Palestine, and then I also didn't feel like I learned a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, so it just felt like a little bit surface level for both of those issues. And if I'm being honest, I have felt that way with the two books by Angela Davis I've read, both this and Our Prison's Obsolete. Kind of think she might not really be for me, which is a shame because I really liked her autobiography when I read it loads of years ago, but so far I haven't really liked any of her works of nonfiction. Oh, then I read The Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, which I absolutely love. I will eventually make a whole video just on this. If I could talk about a work of philosophy changing my life, this would be it. So what Aristotle does in this book is really looks at what it means to be a virtuous person, what sort of character traits you should have, and spends the entirety of the book philosophizing about what these traits should look like and then sort of giving you an example of what is the good level to have. For example, he looks at something like bravery or courage, and he says if you don't have enough courage, you are weak. If you have too much courage, you are reckless. And so the good balance is someone who is brave and courageous is like the perfect amount right in the middle. And I just found his way of looking at these virtues so fascinating. Really changed my life when it comes to what sort of qualities are needed in order to be a good person and to live what he calls a virtuous or a blessed life. Really, really great book. I would highly recommend it. Not easy though. I think I would say it's one of the most challenging philosophy books I've read so far this year, but still worth it. It's worth the struggle. After that, I read Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. I did not like this book at all. If you want to learn about this, watch the movie. I will just say I watched the movie first. What I think the movie does better is it gives you a little bit of a personal touch. This felt very distant, like you didn't really feel connected to any of the indigenous people in the story. So yeah, I would say if you want to learn about this, watch the movie. I think the movie is excellent. I think the book leaves something to be desired. After that, I read A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid, which is just like the cutest little essay written by Jamaica Kincaid talking about Antigua, and it's really sort of a critique on tourism and traveling as a whole. Really, really great stuff. Like, she starts off by talking about the water and how the water in Antigua is not safe, but like how all these tourists are like just so happy with all the blue water. It's just like so funny. Very good. I'm definitely gonna reread that before the end of the year. After that, I read The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde. I didn't mind this, but I didn't love it. And it essentially is her journals talking about her experience with breast cancer. And so I was interested to read it just to get a bit of a better understanding of what that experience is like. And obviously Audre Lorde is like a beautiful writer, so I felt like she would be the one to read if you really want to understand that experience. Certain parts of it were really eye-opening and very interesting, but overall, I guess it's because it's journals, right? It wasn't the most engaging read. Okay, I'm on my last two. I finished both of these the last day of March, so I will just talk about them in any order. So first was A Call for Revolution by the Dalai Lama. I liked this more than I thought I would. He really is just talking about the need for us to focus on social justice and improving society as a whole. Very cute book, very short, very to the point. And yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I also finished that day What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. I didn't love this book, but I think the information in it is very eye-opening and is something that more people should be aware of. I've been interested in exploring asexuality recently because I've just been finding that dating apps, that sort of thing doesn't really work for me. So I wanted to understand different forms of sexuality, different forms of romantic relationships, that sort of thing. And this was very eye-opening if you are at all feeling like you don't quite identify with dating the way most other people do. From reading this, I would say I identify more with like demisexual, demi-romantic. So it was eye-opening in that sense, but I just didn't love the format of it. And again, it wasn't quite the most enjoyable read. It was just like a typical nonfiction book that I don't always love reading. So it's not bad, but I didn't love it. Like I said, I will be making more detailed videos on some of the books on here that really stood out to me. And as I do that, I will include links for them in the description box. So those are the books that I read from January to March of this year, both fiction and nonfiction. In the next video, I will talk about the books I read in Q2, both fiction and nonfiction again. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Just allows this video to be shared with more people on the internet. And if you are new to my channel, this channel is all about re-education and decolonizing the mind. So last year I decided to go on a journey of reading, decolonizing my mind, challenging myself, and I decided to make this YouTube channel as a way that I could share what I'm reading and learning with other people out there in the world. So if you are interested in following along with me on this journey, then feel free to subscribe. Thank you so much for all the love and support, and I will see you in the next one.